Thanks, folks, for coming to this hazard mitigation meeting, public meeting. Technically, all of our committee meetings are public. So if any folks from the public want to show up at those, they're able to. We just have one more left, though. So hopefully you can add your input today. And for folks who are on the committee, thanks for being here. I'm not sure if one of you wants to say anything about from the town's point of view before we get started. If not, I'll begin the presentation.
Thank you for everyone. Oh, Lynn, are you speaking? We can't hear you. Hold on. I'll figure this out. Go ahead, Corinne.
Yeah, she said she'll figure it out. Go ahead, Corinne. She's very quiet, but she is.
You could hear her. Well, I wasn't prepared to give any sort of I'll just say welcome. And Emily, how long have we been working on this? For a year?
Yeah, almost. And we're almost done, which is great, but this is the perfect time to get some input from the public. So
yeah, this has been a process that we have been excited to embark on. Our current hazard mitigation plan was made in 2016, and they're supposed to be updated every 5 years. So we're just a little bit behind. We're excited to be updating the contents of that plan, and we wrapped some of the engagement of this plan up with our climate resilient long range plan, which we've also been working on for the past 2 years and is wrapping up at the end of the fiscal year around June 30th. So it will be great to start fiscal year 2025 with some great set of actions to move forward to make Longmeadow more, resilient to climate and extreme weather and natural hazards. And yeah, so thanks, Emily.
all right, fantastic. I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. I have a bit of a presentation on what hazard mitigation is, which hopefully will be helpful for community members, especially as we begin to really wrap up this plan and give it out to the public for public review. Hopefully they can refer to this presentation, and then we're going to talk about some things and leave that open for conversation. I know because we're mostly committee members today, a lot of the committee members have already added their 2 cents. That's okay. Maybe they thought of something else in the past 3 weeks. Maybe they haven't. Either way, we'll ask these questions so that the effort has been put in. Let me share my screen. The classic Zoom tale of sharing your screen and then making sure everyone can see my shared screen. Great. We're off to a good start. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Emily Farmer. I work for Beta Group, our consulting firm based out of Lincoln, Rhode Island. I work from our Boston office. And we are the consultant helping the town of Longmeadow with this plan. Somebody just shouted outside my window. That was very frightening. And we're going to talk a little bit today about, like I said, sort of an overview of the process of hazard mitigation planning, and then how and where we are in the process in Longmeadow, and then have a little bit of conversation at the end, hopefully to look back on the process as well as look at our new 2024 hazard mitigation actions. So I think that's the most exciting part, because that is really the culmination of this entire process, is those actions. So this is sort of a complicated looking diagram on what the hazard mitigation planning process looks like. And note that this actually isn't your only chance for sort of public interaction with this plan. We had a survey go out with the long range plan for the town, and a lot of folks were able to add their input there to this plan. And we'll also put the draft of this plan, the full draft, out for a 30-day public review, hopefully relatively soon after this meeting. So we've sort of convened our hazard mitigation plan committee. And right now it seems like we're really early on in this process, but we're actually not, because a lot of this back half of the process plan has to do with federal and state reviewers. Once we prepare that draft for public review and do all of our outreach that's necessary, we'll put all of that finalized information into the plan and then submit it to Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. Hopefully they won't have a ton of comments. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It depends on who reviews it. And they always give us some good advice. And then they send it back to us, and then we send it back to FEMA to do the exact same thing from a federal level, make any revisions that they note as needed, get the local adoption of the plan, and then finally FEMA will make sure that we're on the list of approved hazard mitigation plans. And so a lot of this is based around outreach to the public and then outreach to those state and federal agencies. So sometimes you're in a holding pattern with them. They've been relatively fast recently. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that that is a pattern that continues. It's good to know before we start and talk about what hazard mitigation is, because it's sort of a broad topic. When you think of hazards, you're not really sure what's included in there. It's important to know that this is a natural hazard mitigation plan. So we're not talking about any sort of technology or anything of that nature. We're talking about earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, things of that sense. And hazard mitigation is any sustained action taken to reduce the risk to people and structures and property from natural hazards. So we look at high-risk areas like the floodplain and try and limit development there, try and make sure all structures are up to code. We make drainage improvements to reduce flooding. We make sure that brush is cleared to prevent brush fire, things of that nature. It's really tied directly into the emergency management cycle as a whole. Hazard mitigation is part of that emergency and disaster management. And it's important because it happens proactively before a disaster takes place. And hazard mitigation is also related to climate resilience. So we consider future events and how climate change and the climate may impact those future events, and seek to minimize future losses by making smart present-day decisions around land use and building construction and public education and awareness. And it all ties into this emergency management cycle. It's also relatively easy to get emergency preparedness and hazard mitigation confused. And they're not mutually exclusive. They often overlap each other. But we might talk about hazard mitigation as inputting directions for emergency preparedness into town plans, documents, zoning, and looking at a broader scale of those preparedness actions. Whereas those direct emergency preparedness actions are actually obtaining generators and emergency communications or equipment and things of that nature. If we think about the accessibility of an emergency shelter versus the actual planning that goes around an emergency shelter and the operation of that shelter, that's a good sort of balance of hazard mitigation being the planning and prep that goes around preparing where a shelter may be, who's in charge of it, and then the actual operation of that shelter is the emergency preparedness aspect. What are the benefits of hazard mitigation? Hopefully, we're reducing risk and danger for people, for property, for the land itself. And we're also providing the town with future resources for projects that can contribute to hazard mitigation and keep towns safe. A huge part of this, as with any sort of plan that needs to be updated periodically, is making sure that the town is eligible for hazard mitigation planning grants. And the grant window opens in the June of each year. A lot of the grants that are available for towns are only available for towns with an active hazard mitigation plan. So really, that's why we do this, but we also do this to ensure the safety of those living and working in Longmeadow. I mentioned before that outreach is a pretty big part of what this plan is about. And that's not just because this is the way that Beta does things. This is because this is how FEMA does things. FEMA has greatly expanded their scrutiny of participation, and municipalities are required to actively participate in the planning of a hazard mitigation plan. So this process allows the public to provide feedback and allows us to ensure that we catch every area that we need to catch, every vulnerability that we need to catch within Longmeadow. So this is a little bit about how we approach that through Beta's lens. We have those committee meetings, community outreach, updates on the town Facebook, and calendars, things of that nature. We had our community online survey that went out last year. So if you're thinking that it was recent, don't worry about that. And then we have this public meeting and presentation, and also any of our committee meetings are open to the public as well. And that 30-day public review is a huge portion of that public interaction. We hope that members of the public will take a look at this plan and note if we're missing anything or if something is wrong before we send it to those state and federal agencies for their review. Hazard mitigation also has a ton to do with climate change, like I mentioned before. There's no greater systemic threat to the health of our human and natural systems, especially in Massachusetts. Though Longmeadow is not a coastal community, there's still the risk of flooding that's increasing with climate change. And we view almost every hazard that we look at in this plan through the lens of climate impacts. And it's present in all aspects of our work. Since the 2018 state hazard mitigation plan, Massachusetts has been making strides in incorporating climate resilience into their plans and specifically into their hazard mitigation plans. And the most recent state hazard mitigation plan in 2023 has been super helpful in giving tips and tricks on how municipalities can be more climate resilient as we move forward. Longmeadow has already sort of been on this train for a while. They completed their municipal vulnerability preparedness workshop and are already making strides in climate resilience, but this plan is another opportunity for the town to receive more funding for more climate resilient projects. So that's really exciting. We'll walk through a little bit step by step of this mitigation planning process, because what does all this information gathering actually take to get to a final product? And we start off with a risk assessment, and this is the structure that we'll go through. In this risk assessment, we do a couple things. This is the big sort of data gathering portion of the plan. We want to understand what hazards affect certain jurisdictions, and then we analyze each of these hazards as they, in respect to where a hazard might affect the planning area, its extent, how often those sorts of natural hazards impact an area, and how likely they are to occur in the future, what parts of the community are most affected by those hazards, and the potential consequences and severity of the hazards. So we do that by first having the committee identify natural hazards, which we'll discuss in a few slides, understanding where the current mitigation capabilities of a town are and how effective they are, and then understanding how these hazards impact the town and what populations are particularly vulnerable. And we also try and understand, what critical facilities, what buildings and infrastructure are critical for town operation that we should pay specific attention to. So this is sort of saying the same thing. What is a natural hazard? This is a good definition of it here. Natural hazard is any event or physical condition that has the potential to cause damage or fatalities or injuries to business, interruption of municipal practices, things of that nature. And all of this goes into the risk assessment. And these are the components that we add into this plan. So this is the first part of our a portion of this meeting where I'll ask for some public engagement. And if folks are watching this presentation at home, I'll ask you to think about this on your own time as well. Think about your neighborhood and your home and your daily life. Maybe when you're sending your kids off to school, what are you thinking about? Which of these hazards has impacted you? How and when? if we just have maybe one person, even if they're a committee member,
I can speak to the drought, which I think many of us in Longmeadow can remember 2 summers ago. We were experiencing, like the rest of Massachusetts, varying levels of drought throughout the summer, and it affected our town individually. I think it affected people's landscapes mostly, but for the town as a whole on the back end, I know our emergency management and our DPW was very concerned over the time about our water supplies and our water tower and the ability to keep up pressure for fighting, either brush fires or wildfires if they happened, but also home fires. So that was an emergency management perspective that we had to deal with due to varying levels of drought 2 summers ago.
Yeah, that's a great one. If anyone else thinks of ways that any of these natural hazards has impacted them, feel free to speak out throughout the meeting. You can raise your hand at any time. I'm happy to be interrupted. I will say that we were working in a town recently where midway through their hazard mitigation plan, there was a dam failure that impacted like 12 homes in the town. And I remember that being like, well, here's an active case of how we can try and prevent this from happening and causing damage in the future. Maybe not as relevant to Longmeadow, but it was definitely an interesting experience to be working in the town at that time. So these are the hazards of concern chosen by the committee. And like I said, we like to take a lens of climate resilience and look at all of the hazards through the perspective of climate change. So many communities have begun to organize their hazard mitigation plans like this. And then, of course, there's also things like earthquakes, which aren't going to be impacted by climate change, but are still a hazard of concern, no matter how rare they might be. There was one a couple weeks ago that I know a couple of my friends felt in Eastern Massachusetts. So it definitely is still something that we have to consider. So those are what we chose. And we also did an inventory of the critical facilities in town. What are the municipal buildings, water treatment and pump stations, sewer treatment and pump stations, utility infrastructure, dams, transportation facilities, care facilities. What are the areas in town that if they were to be damaged in a natural hazard event, that could mean something very severe or critical could be prevented from happening. And we talk about natural hazard severity in terms of both, actual risk to human lives, but also risk to the general operations of a municipality. So if things can't function as normal, we count that as an issue in hazard mitigation. And so the question we're asking when we're looking at these critical facilities is, how can we predict the suffering due to a natural hazard? And what would that be if we didn't mitigate risk at all? What's the worst case scenario, which is pretty grim to look at, but luckily we get to put into action the hazard mitigation practices that we developed through this plan. We also assess the capabilities that the town already has in place. We break them down into different categories. So, what planning and regulatory devices does a town have? What are their zoning ordinances and their subdivision regulations? What sort of funding do they have at their disposal? And we want to apply how previously completed actions may end up becoming capabilities as well. So we look at the previous plan and say, what of these have you completed? How have they been incorporated into town practices? And oftentimes, towns will have taken action on those plans, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and combined more mitigation practices into their general town running. So if a town has a dedicated fund for water-related projects, this can be an asset that we want to know about going forward in the plan. Our next step is to establish goals. Long Meadow was lucky. They only have one, and it's a pretty good comprehensive goal. So the goal that was revised a little bit from that 2016 plan is to minimize the loss of life, damage to property, and the destruction of governmental services and general business activities due to the following hazards. And we list the hazards that we spoke about earlier. And this is sort of an all-encompassing goal that all of the actions that we develop in this plan should lean back onto. After we establish our goals or goal, we then identify projects and actions. So we have the foundation of our plan. We've gathered all the data, which takes the most time out of this planning process. We've developed a goal. We know what we want from this plan. Now, what can we do with this foundation? So we develop these mitigation strategies or actions, which are sort of a blueprint of how we can reduce losses within the municipality. We want to know what actions have been implemented already, how can they be changed, what new strategies should be pursued. And we split them up into different categories. And we want to make sure we hit on most, if not all of these categories, so we can have a versatile approach to hazard mitigation. So that includes incorporating new things into planning and prevention, into those zoning ordinances and things of that nature, into property protection, directly protecting people's property, natural resource protection. So any of those open space areas in town that people value, want to make sure that they're protected, structural projects, emergency services, and actually, sort of most importantly, I think, public education and awareness. And that, I think, can be shown pretty easily when you can go through this list of items that we've developed in this plan. You can see the public education and awareness actions that we've developed here as well. So I have our next very exciting question, which is a question that the committee has already discussed. So I am going to go through and read to you, or at least let you read, the mitigation actions that the committee has decided on. But it's always good to get the public's opinion before we give you what we've decided on, so that if you add something that maybe is different, then we can add it in without your previous knowledge of the actions. And then after, I'll ask the same question again, so that we can go back in with the knowledge of the actions that the committee has already decided on. So how can we help your community? What can we / the town do to decrease damages? And how can we ensure that we bounce back quickly after a natural hazard event? It'd be helpful if I could speak. I can also give examples, but it's sort of useless to give examples when we have the actions. So if no one, I'll talk very slowly. If no one has a response to these questions now, we're definitely going to come back to them after we review the actions that the committee has previously developed. Okay. So this is a little bit about, so those are the types of actions that I mentioned before, and a little bit about how we develop the actions. So in these next couple of slides, I'm going to show you the actions that the committee has developed. They don't have all of the information that is listed here, because that would be too much to put on a slide. There's already a lot of words happening. But when we identify these mitigation actions, we want to describe the action itself. But then we also want to pinpoint who are the lead and supporting parties. You know, is DPW a lead party on this? Is Conservation Commission a leading party? Do they need assistance from Eversource or something of that nature? What is the proposed timeframe? Is this a long-term or short-term project? What are the estimated costs? Everybody's favorite part in developing a plan. And what are the potential funding sources for those costs? We're lucky because FEMA gives us a lot of resources for that. So it's easy to, beyond just the town's resources, input recommendations for where other grants could come from. So now we're gonna hop in to, I know there's a lot happening on the slide. We're gonna hop into the mitigation actions from this 2024 plan developed by your committee. I can read them out. I'll read them out. There are, I believe, 16 of them. So I'll read expeditiously. Our first action is develop a fueling, maintenance, and replacement plan for generators within the town. You can read the list of generators there and incorporate those processes into the emergency procedures plan. Our second action is to implement high priority recommendations from the stormwater asset management plan once that plan is complete, with particular emphasis on projects identified for areas in town already experiencing stormwater flooding, which we list in the plan as well. Our third is to educate citizens living in the floodplain about the floodplain bylaw and local wetlands protection bylaw to protect and preserve floodable natural resource areas and include resources that regard the National Flood Insurance Plan program. Our fourth is to educate citizens about emergency operations and services provided through the town, including the Code Red system and heating and cooling shelter locations. Our fifth action is, when developing the 2027 Open Space and Recreation Plan, identify and prioritize strategies to protect and enhance, if possible, natural resource area functions, including that of floodplains, forests, and farmland. Our sixth is to advocate to the Office of Dam Safety to ensure the Longmeadow Country Club Dam complies with applicable regulations and receives regular inspections. Our seventh is to assess the condition of the Laurel Pond Dam, the consequences of its failure, and determine recommended maintenance regime and budget. 8 is to conduct an annual assessment of building roof conditions using thermal imaging, visual inspection, and core sampling if needed. Regular inspection for basement flooding, HVAC, and building and mechanical issues in municipal buildings in accordance with the procedure list provided through the town's insurance. Be helpful if I could read. Number 9 is to go through the emerald ash borer and Dutch elm disease treatments, follow through with those. Number 10 is to develop a beaver management plan in coordination with landowners in the meadows to address chronic flooding issues that threaten roadway infrastructure and incur property damage. Number 11 is to monitor public trees for hazard conditions on an annual basis and formally update the hazard tree risk assessment every 3 to 5 years. Number 12 is to continue to monitor outdoor water usage and amend the outdoor water use bylaw as necessary to ensure viability of the town's emergency water supply and continue to advertise the availability of discounted water conservation devices through Department of Public Works. Nearing the end, we have number 13, which is to seek to establish an emergency water interconnection with Enfield, Connecticut to ensure adequate water pressure during emergencies, such as large fires, and to ensure a continuous supply of water in the event that Springfield Water and Sewer Commission's infrastructure fails. That directly relates to that drought concern. Number 14 is to conduct a community tree canopy assessment to identify if there are any neighborhoods with an inequitable amount of canopy cover. Target those neighborhoods for increased planting if possible. Number 15 is to enhance communication strategies with vulnerable populations in town, starting with those identified in the LRP, which was recently completed. We're in the middle of it. We're everywhere in that plan, in the hidden communities report in that plan. And then finally, number 16 is to coordinate with vendors to protect power lines, gas lines, fiber cables, and additional infrastructure to reduce incidences of power outages and infrastructure damage during storm events. So I just dumped 16 actions, all covering different hazards, all of different types on you. I can go back to any of them that we want here, but I will say that I think this is personally, I think this is a really good list of actions. I think it's probably the most comprehensive list of actions in terms of addressing all of the natural hazards we spoke about, sometimes maybe except for earthquakes, but I think that can be in number 8. I think that's covered. And in terms of versatility of these actions. And so I think this is a really solid list, but I'm curious to know if folks think that we're missing anything or are confused about something. or want to know more about an action, or anything of that nature. Again, I know that a lot of people who wrote these actions are here this evening, so you might not have anything to say, and that's okay as well. Okay. So this is sort of where we're at in this plan. We've assessed risk, we've established our goal, and we've identified specific projects and actions to implement that will increase mitigation in the town. The final part of this plan is how we update and maintain the plan. But I will say that this has to do both with sort of the direct implementation of the actions that we identified. We want to make sure that they're functional, they're implementable. We have a responsible party. We have an idea of where our funding is going to come from. And this also has to do with, all right, 5 years down the line, we check in with this plan. If nothing's been done, how do we improve that process? And how do we ensure that people are pretty consistently checking in and looking for opportunities for funding for the projects that we've suggested. So we lay out that protocol, and that's actually what our final committee meeting will discuss, laying out that protocol for keeping the plan up to date, and making sure that there's a process in place for keeping the plan current so that when the next time to update the plan comes around, you can take directly from maybe an annual meeting or something of that nature to get a sense of what work has been done on the plan over the 5-year period. These are our next steps. Our goal after our 5th committee meeting is to have that draft plan posted for public review and shared with town committees and neighboring towns for their input. Sometimes we receive 2 or 3 comments from one person. Sometimes we receive no comments, but it is really important that we have that 30-day period for folks to be able to look and review the plan. Once we receive that back, we will revise the draft based on public comment. And like I sort of mentioned at the beginning of the process here, submit to MEMA and FEMA in that sort of long process for their comment, review, and hopefully approval pending adoption. And that pending adoption means that the select board needs to adopt before FEMA officially recognizes a hazard mitigation plan as sort of a real official document. This is the most uncertain part of the plan because we're waiting for MEMA and FEMA, and we never know how long that's going to take. MEMA is often faster than FEMA, which I guess is probably no surprise to anybody. But this is our sort of coming schedule. And that is the end of our comprehensive presentation about hazard mitigation, which is sort of a complicated topic to condense, but I think we did it. Curious to know if anyone has any questions or comments or concerns or wants to tell me about their weekend or anything of that nature. Okay. That's okay too. We're early, which is a lovely thing to be for a public meeting. If there are any other thoughts, questions, or ideas, you can probably email someone from the committee, maybe Corinne or Tim, but you can also email me. Wait, let me stop sharing so I can see everybody back again. I'll put my email in the chat. I know that we are recording this, so it probably won't be shared with the world, but it's out there anyway. I have a business card and I've given it out before, so I'm always happy to answer questions about the hazard mitigation process, both specifically for Long Meadow and in general. And I appreciate those of you on and off the committee who are able to make it tonight. Any comments, questions before we log on? Okay.
Thank you, Emily.
You, Emily.
Thank you very much.
I'll talk to you all.
Thank you.
All right.